today's guest is Rachel Rosen. She's one of the legendary members of Indecision and then Most Precious Blood. Let's start a little bit by going back to the beginning, Rachel, and just talking about what got you into this, like got you started.
Playing music in bands or
Yeah, well, I mean,
okay.
obviously, when I met you, you were in Indecision. I
Yes.
remember I met all you guys down at a diner in Brooklyn, and
Yep.
you all talked about me being like the Raymond Pettibon for Indecision,
Yes.
and but what led up to that point?
um so I had met Indecision when I was doing a radio show for NYU,
Okay,
and I had had I had had them come play, and I think I had met Justin when Shutdown. I had Shutdown play first because they'd sent me a demo. So I had them come up and play, and then Justin came with them. Justin's the other guitar player in Indecision, or he was the only guitar player then. And so he gave me an Indecision demo and I really liked it, had them up to play and just clicked really well with them and became friends with all of them. And then and then I started going out with Justin at that time also. And then just wormed my way into the band, starting off with selling merch and then kept bugging him about like, you need another guitar player, you need another guitar player. And finally, I played a random show with them in Florida, was shut down on like a tour in 1996. And they were all sort of like, let's not do that again. So I had to wait another year. And I think finally in 1997, we brought it up again. And then everyone was more for it. And I joined the band then.
okay. Do you think that you got like more technical over that year, or do you think that they just had more closed minds, or what do you
I
think
just
was going
think,
on?
it's always, I didn't want them to have like Yoko Ono syndrome with me where like they think I'm going to like come in and like
It's
take
a
over.
little bit like a boys' club,
Yeah, I mean, sort of, but I was just like, I was Justin's girlfriend, and like, you want to be
right?
careful with stuff like that because bands and relationships, a lot of times things go very wrong. And so I don't think they wanted that drama.
Okay.
And I think just, I went on a bunch of tours with them, and I think, it was helpful to have along because I toured before then with like SFA and but I guess that was pretty much the only tour I'd done. But it was for 2 months. So I had the most experience out of all of them because they hadn't done anything really till then. So I think it just took them a little time to get used to the idea of me being in the band because it had just been the four of them mainly for so long. So, or for 4 years. So, change and making sure like that it was going to work out. So, but it did.
Was there a lot of tension with you being like a female musician in the band? Because metalcore, I don't think was like as non-inclusive as like say maybe some metal bands or punk bands might have been. Like
Yeah.
metalcore was a little bit more like liberal-minded, but I don't know if you ran into some difficulty there.
I mean, it was always like, I mean, never with my own band, aside from the fact that the most difficult thing I faced was that Justin never wanted me to really write anything. That it took him, like, it was the hardest for him to like have somebody else have song ideas because he just was very much in control of that. So I think that was my biggest hurdle, like within the band. As far as like playing shows, it was just stupid stuff like, uh the security guards like at going backstage like wouldn't believe I was in the band and wouldn't want to let me backstage or stupid things like that and sometimes stupid comments and things yelled on stage. But I think for the most part, especially with Indecision, there wasn't a lot of focus on me being female back then. It wasn't so much a big deal with the types of shows we played, and it was more Most Precious Blood that I had more issues than with Indecision, which is interesting because it was later. I think Indecision was just more, things were more underground for the most part, and it was a lot more like, I would say a little bit more on the punk side of things and not so much like Most Precious Blood was more part of like the more metalcore scene with in the 2000s.
I feel like all
And
metalcore was kind of like along those lines at that time, like a little bit more punk, a little bit more indie.
yeah,
Everybody had a lot more to say. It was like more about like personal opinions and politics and so on, as opposed to like trying to hit as broad of an audience as possible.
yeah.
Nobody really thought they'd make money, I think, off that.
No, I think not till it wasn't until early 2000s. I think that's when things changed and where bands started getting bigger and more, bands started, metalcore bands were like on going on Ozfest and like it started getting a lot bigger and a lot more attention, I think then. Whereas in the late 90s, it was more of just like the original hardcore punk type thing and it was never it just was not really a big deal. Like I
Do
probably
you
felt
think
much.
Hatebreed was kind of like a part of that, like the whole like Hatebreed and signed to a major label and
Yeah,
like
oh, definitely. I mean, they were like the first, probably one of the first bands like that were our contemporaries that got signed like that and just totally blew up and the fact that they're still doing it now is awesome. And but yeah, I think that that's definitely when things started changing. And then there was more like metal magazines covering like our types of bands and all like the Trustkill bands, and Trustkill became like a big label with Most Precious Blood. And I remember having to do like weird like photo shoots that made me super uncomfortable where they tried to put me in the front. I'm like, I'm not the singer. Like, why is there a focus on like, please, no, like I hate photos, I hate all this stuff. And I just want to play. Like, I don't want any of this stuff. And I always remember having to do some weird photo shoot with Marta from Bleeding Through, where like they had like the tuba. She's like playing like keyboard on the guitar, like in my lap or something like that. I'm like, what is this? Like, this is
was
not what
they
I
trying to like
signed up.
make some political point that thought would help them
I
sell more magazines or
Yeah,
something?
and it was just trying to focus on like, oh, look at these, look at these girls or whatever.
Right,
Like
right.
it just and it was not what I started playing in bands. Like I did not want anything like that. I'm not good with it's just not what makes me comfortable. It's hard enough for me getting used to have to being on the stage and playing and then to have to add stuff like that into it. It was hard for me. And I tried to play along for the sake of the band so that we could, do better. I didn't want to be difficult or anything, but like I did not enjoy stuff like that.
Well, I remember one thing I really liked about Indecision was like how political and how like how like they had no problem speaking their mind on all sorts of issues.
Oh yeah.
Were you into that more? Were you into the music more? What grabbed you about the band?
Um I mean, it with Indecision, like a lot of their lyrics were, anti-Catholic and anti-religion, specifically because they all went to Catholic school. So I had a very different upbringing than them because I was brought up. I mean, I'm Jewish, but like I wasn't brought up like ultra Jew, like Orthodox or anything. We celebrated like the big holidays. I went to temple maybe like twice a year. So I was not from like a religious family and religion was never pushed on me like that. So I didn't have like the same view on it as they did. I mean, I could see where they were coming from, but I didn't have the same experiences. So as far as that aspect of the lyrics and stuff, like I understood it, but it was hard for me to relate because I honestly didn't even know much about Catholicism. I was so like some of the time, I'm like, I don't know all the imagery and all like,
I
I
think a
never
lot of
read.
Catholics don't know a lot about Catholicism,
I
but
know probably, but I mean, Justin definitely and Tom, they all, the whole band, because they were in a Catholic school, it was forced on them.
right.
And yes, I had a bat mitzvah and I had to like learn how to read Hebrew and stuff like that, but I never read the Bible. I've never even really read like the Torah, aside from the part I had to read at my bat mitzvah. And so, I mean, so that part was, that was more their thing. And obviously I wasn't against it, but, um, and then, as things like later issues, um, I think with like Release the Cure, like some of that stuff was a little out there for sure, but it was just more about like
And
just
that
sort
was
of push.
delving into conspiracy theories and all that
Yes.
sort of stuff.
So it
Yeah,
was just sort of pushing buttons with people and seeing like what, and I mean, I still believe some of it's true, but obviously not like, I'm not like, I don't know. I
well,
have to
I
probably
think
go.
the funny thing about conspiracy theories is like there are actual conspiracy theories. Like they're like things that were conspiracy, like the Manhattan Project. I
Yeah.
mean, that was a conspiracy theory that actually is true. So people think conspiracy theory means like, oh, it must be like Alex Jones, like crazy wackadoodle stuff, you
Yeah.
know. But no, they're government is evil. I think is the ultimate. I remember you had that whole MIA experience, and like they kind of blew up. They had a whole bunch of bands, and then they folded almost immediately.
Yeah.
And
That was great.
like I was like and I don't remember if it was Justin that told me to do the album cover, but I just agreed to do the Coalesce album cover. I was like,
Hmm.
oh, dude, Coalesce is one of my favorite bands. I gotta do this. I already promised them. So yeah, it just didn't happen. But what happened with MIA?
So they they started really quick and they had a lot of money. And at the time that I think at the time that they approached us and stuff, they were signing like Candiria and I can't remember who else was on it at the time.
I remember the
And
sign Candiria, yeah.
yeah, I just don't remember. I think there was one or two other bands. I just don't remember who. But we were completely broke. We didn't have anything. We didn't even have like a van that worked very well. And we needed money and we weren't making it
You'd have
shows.
clips on the back of your albums where it'd be just like, fuck this band, I can't book them. Their band's always breaking
Yeah, yep,
down.
yeah. So, I mean, it was sort of more like they offered us all this stuff, like, money for a new van and, a nice budget for recording and all this, and made a lot of promises to us. And then also, when we did that Life on the Ropes tour in 1999 with Sick of It All and AFI and Hot Water Music, like they had the money to pay for us to be on the bus with Sick of It All, which was basically like the only way that we were going to get on the tour. So, probably was not the smartest decision, but we got to do some stuff. But then unfortunately, just like they just couldn't get their footing. And then the whole label was funded by this guy in Texas, like some old guy and who was like into oil it was all very weird. It
Right.
was probably just like a tax write-off for him.
Well, so
Just
just the label kind of folded, and you were like,
yeah, and
what do
then
we do now?
it's just sort of God, I can't even really remember. I just know that all of a sudden they were like, yeah, we're closing, and I don't even know. I think they gave us some copies of Release the Cure. Like they were closing. I think they even gave us like we got some like furniture from the office or something like weird like that. And then that was it. And then and it was just that was towards the end, like right before we ended up breaking up. So it was just one more thing in the string of shit that was just like going wrong for us. So we probably made the wrong choice, I think, in going with that label because I think if we had gone, we had an offer from Victory at the time at like before then that we turned down and not like
Why
they're
did you
much
turn down
better.
Victory for MIA?
It wasn't really so much that it was Victory was in that was probably in 97 or 98 that and I think it just at the time like we just really questioned Victories like they just seemed to just like the ethics and like we were very
Yeah,
like
they had a little bit of that frat boy thing going on.
yeah, and we were so like DIY back then, like,
Yeah,
we we wanted to stay with Exit and stay with our friends and
right.
everything. And at that point we were like, oh no, like it was before we were just like more desperate for more things at the time. So I think that was sort of why we turned it down. And um and so because I think at the Victory was seen very differently in for like the types of shows we were playing at the time, even though like I loved a lot of Victory bands, I don't think that um it wasn't really the scene that we were in much then. So we just figured we had to stay true to like our ethics at the time. And our $5 shirts and $5 shows and $5 CDs.
This
So
very Fugazi of you.
yes. So yeah, so that we had that option, but that was off the table, and then it just was MIA, and we decided to give it a chance, and it did not work out for us. But there was a lot of stuff that never worked out for that band.
Well, I remember if you told me, but or if it was Justin that when you went on like a tour in Europe and you had Artie from Millhouse and like there was so much tension it kind of broke up the band and like maybe you should have like take some time off
Yeah,
and kept the band as opposed to breaking it up. It was like everybody was just done.
yeah, because we were touring so much, and like I said, we weren't making much on it. It was stressful. Like the shows weren't that great, and it just wears on you after a while. You just when you're so tired and you're just with the same people all the time, and um, the tour. I think it was like when once Bago, our bass player, he quit, and that was like a big blow. And he sort of because he was like a good like mediating person. Like
Okay.
you could always count on him to like have a good outlook on things, and he was super helpful, and like it was just great always having him around. And when he left, it threw off the balance of a lot of things. And so we tried having a fill-in bass player, and that didn't work. And then I moved to bass, and we did some stuff like that. But like, and Artie was just he was drinking a lot because he was newly drinking, newly edge broken. So
What
he
Artie
was
was?
yeah. So he was and like he was getting
Wasn't
super.
he? I heard he was chasing Candace around too, like from Walter
Oh,
Jericho.
on that tour, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So that was going on that tour. And so yeah, so he started drinking a lot. And like, I mean, I always drank, and I Tom and Justin were straight edge, but Pat and Bago drank. But we always drank, like we tried to keep the drinking off the stage. We tried not to get like completely wasted before a show. And Artie just was like, he was getting really drunk and then acting like really crazy, saying weird shit on stage. Um and we were getting like it was just getting us upset because he's the voice of the band and the one who's speaking for all of us, and like some of the stuff is just like, why is he saying this? And so we just started just building up, and then finally it was on the tour with Kill Your Idols where like in El Paso it was like Justin and I were like so far gone with everything, like so over all of it. Like we probably should have never done that tour, and we maybe would have stayed together. But yeah, like he was just drinking and drunk, and there was nobody at the show really, and the tour wasn't going that well. And finally, it was just like everything sort of blew up, and that was it. It was done, at least for a while, till for like 6 years, it was done.
So was it a 6 year break before you started Most Precious Blood?
No, it was only like a couple months before we started Most Precious Blood, but it was a six. Like Indecision did the first reunion show. I think it was 2006 that we broke up in 2000, and Most Precious Blood started that same year, and then I think Most Precious Blood sort of stopped doing full-time touring in 2006, and then we just did like an Indecision reunion show, and then we were sort of doing like both bands like a little bit here and there. But it was sort of like after 2006 that with Most Precious Blood we decided like we're sort of all like we needed a break and we wanted to just stop for a while.
Okay. So is the band around anymore now?
Most Precious Blood?
Yeah.
I mean, technically, we never formally broke up,
Yeah,
but
I saw Indecision on a reunion show not too long ago, so I know that
yeah.
you
But
guys still do some shows. Yeah.
yes, but it's mainly Indecision. Like Most Precious Blood, we did a show with Tom singing where we did like Nothing in Vain songs was probably the last thing we did, and which was a few years ago. We don't really do much with that band because it was weird because we never formally broke up, and because like we had so many albums. Like Tom was only on that first album, and then we had another 3 albums with with Rob singing, and we don't really talk much to Rob these days. And our last drummer, he lives on this in this tiny country called like Dili or something, somewhere off Indonesia. So he's not around in the US too much. So yeah, so we don't really, most Precious Blood doesn't really do much. I mean, I would probably say that the last lineup for like the last record will probably not play again. So
So what happened with Tom? Why did Tom he originally started with Indecision and then you
yeah,
went to Artie and
yeah,
then you brought Tom back for Most Spirit's Blood. What
yeah.
happened there?
Um, well, with Indecision, it was a mix of like just personalities at the time not meshing that well. And I think, we think that Tom wanted like other things, but was like afraid to give up the band, but wanted to continue more with school and move on a little bit. But like, so I think that's a little bit of, and just, we weren't getting along at the time then very well at all. So that's what led to that first
With Tom and the
departure.
rest of the band?
Yeah, Tom and Indecision. We just weren't getting, it happens when you spend that much time with the same people, certain personality traits like that. Normally when you see somebody once in a while, it's like, whatever, I don't care. Like things get completely blown out of proportion in a situation when you're with people all the time in a tiny van where you
Like
can't really
touring?
get,
Yeah.
yeah, you can't get away from each other really. So stuff
I
like that
kind of I kind of
happens.
heard there were some issues with Rob too. But go ahead.
Yeah, there was some issues. Um, but yeah, I mean, with Most Precious Blood, yes, we started out with Tom, but then the same sort of things popped up again. And I think that was when he decided he was going to go to law school anyway. So it probably worked out for the best. And then things were good with Rob at first, but then it was just another thing where personality issues just weren't meshing well. And we just, and as things sort of like things were going well with Most Precious Blood for a while, and then when things sort of started getting worse and shows weren't that great, we weren't really getting good tours or anything, then it's harder to ignore like things that are bothering you in the band. So yeah, I can't name one incident with Rob where specifically like something bad happened, but it just sort of fizzled out a little bit is sort of how I'll put it.
Did Trustkill disband while you were still on the label?
Yes. I think I think that's when it sold to like Sony or something. It was like in the midst of like right before Do Not Resuscitate was supposed to come out. All this stuff was going on, and then we didn't even know like what the label was going to be called. I think that's when it switched to Bullet Tooth. So I think maybe that album technically was on Bullet Tooth, but it was some weird transition period where then like that we were done with that album, and then it sat for a long time because of Josh like doing whatever with the labels and whatever issues were going on in the transition. And then like by
Was
the
Bullet Tooth one of those like it's a major label, but they're like side label?
yeah, because I don't know why Trustkill was no more, but I think Bullet Tooth was a subsidiary of like Sony, or I don't even remember.
But technically, you guys were on Sony, so you have a record on
Ah,
Sony.
sure. If it was so, I can't even remember which label. I think it was Sony, but it's weird because so many of my memories of like band stuff, I think my brain just like overloaded on memories that it just like shoved out like big chunks of my life back then where like people will tell you like, you remember this or that? And I'm like, I have zero recollection. I have no idea. I don't know what happened to half my memories.
Right. Well, I obviously didn't have the same experience, but I had brain cancer. So I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
there are plenty of people that say something like, "Hey, do you remember me?" It's like, no.
yeah.
But then again, you meet somebody, and they're like 8 years later,
Yeah.
now like they're twice as fat and they have a beard and
Yeah, no, I mean that's different, but I just mean more like things that like happened on tour that like Tom has like an amazing memory, so he remembers everything, and he'll be like, "Oh, you remember this?" And I'm like, "No." And even like Melissa, who's the singer in The Wage of Sin, like she remembers everything too, and she'll like be like, "Oh, do you remember when this happened and we did this?" And I'm like, "No." Like, was I there? Like, I don't remember anything.
so did you have a really good reception when you went over to Europe?
um, Yeah, for the most part, yeah, Europe was always a good time. I mean, certain countries more than others were better, but
I
but
heard
we
that
all
Europe is more open. They're like, especially for bigger bands like Sick of It All and stuff like that.
yeah, and I mean we got to tour with Sick of It All there, which was great. And we went there with Madball and even like the tours that we headlined, like they treat you nicely, like you get a decent amount of money, you get food, you get like a place to stay. So like those kinds of things, like at a time where in the US, we were pretty much hardly getting anything, and you'd get like maybe $5 a day for food. And so like if you go there and to have like people treat you like that was always just really nice. So we always liked going there.
Have you seen all those people from Northern European countries that tried to be Madball, but they're very definitely not
Yeah.
Madball?
Yeah, it doesn't work.
It's funny too when they sing and they try to sing in like this Bronx, Brooklyn
Yeah.
accent, and it's horrible. So, did you have more of that like kind of tough guy crowd coming to see you in Europe, or was it just very mixed, or just people were more open?
uh it was I think Indecision was definitely not so much a tough guy crowd. Like, and I remember like our first time there, we even played like a lot of squats and stuff. And it
Oh
was
yeah.
definitely, yeah, it was not like that. I think maybe with Most Precious Blood, then it was a bit more like that, but that's because that's when we toured more with Sick of It All and Madball. And although, I mean, Indecision went with Agnostic Front, but it was only for like a couple weeks. And um, so I think it was more of a mix there, but we always had that issue where we never fit in either place because we were always either too tough for like the I don't know how to describe it, for like the more like straight up hardcore like youth crew type stuff. We were like too metal for them, but we weren't like tough enough for like people who like the really tough guy like New York hardcore stuff. Like so we always had this issue where like, which I mean in a way is sort of cool, but we never sort of belonged anywhere. We always felt like we were always like in between things. And so sometimes that could be like a little annoying in the fact that you can't like, it's just like you can't please anybody
It seems like you were
in
a
a
little
way.
bit. It seems like you were a little bit more like for like the Converge crowd and the Coalesce and Dead Guy crowd than you were for like the Madball crowd.
But we were too tough for like the dead guy. Like
Oh,
we
really?
were too, yeah, we were too straightforward for them, and then we were too out there for like the straight up like madball crowd. So, but on the other hand, it was cool because we got to play with all those bands. Like it was, and it always worked. But we always were sort of like on the fringe of everything, like just not fully fitting in anywhere.
Do you have one band that you feel like you really get along with, like your band really jived with them really well?
I mean, back in the day, we always loved touring with Sick of It All. Like we got along with them really well, and we did do a fair amount of touring with them. And also, like early on with Silent Majority from Long Island, we did a lot of like early tours with them, and Kill Your Idols, we did a lot of tours with as well. So those bands were always, we always had a good time.
But it not as much. You didn't have as much a receptive audience from like the kind of Dillinger Dead Guy, like
No. I think Dead Guy broke up before. I don't know if we ever played with, I can't remember if we played with Dead Guy. We might have like towards the end, but probably more with Kiss It Goodbye. I think we played with them. Um, but yeah, and then we played with Dillinger Escape Plan, we played with Converge, we played with Cave In, like all those bands. But yeah, we always got like a weird reception at those shows.
I remember Missing on Earth, and you were telling me how good the musicians were in that band.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And then they got signed. They made some money, but it seemed like every metalcore band that gets signed, they have trouble making the transition to something more mainstream. Like people just don't get the rawness. I mean, I'm sure everyone complains
Yeah.
about it. I sound like an old man when I say it, but it does happen.
I mean, I think Unearth ended up. I know they did a lot of big tours, and they're still around.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I feel like they, I don't. I've sort of lost touch, like with how the band is doing because I just have not been to like here in California. Like I feel like I don't know when shows are because I don't really have a lot of like friends in the scene here so much. So like no one tell like I have to like actually like look at all the clubs and see who's coming, and I'm lazy and I
It
forget, and
might
then
be a
be
little
like,
bit of a different scene too.
it is, but I'll always check sort of like if somebody I know is coming through, I like to see them. Or I mean it's definitely a much younger scene here. Um so sometimes, I don't want to be like the weird old lady at the show. But see the thing, like I mean Dead Guy was one of my favorite bands. So I would have loved to play with them all the time, but I felt like it didn't work all that well. So, but I feel like a band like Silent Majority and sort of like Kill Your Idols too, they were also sort of like in between scenes where they can fit in different places. So I think that's why, like when we would tour together, it always worked because we're sort of just like a mix of a lot of stuff and take stuff from like a lot of different places, and and
Well, it seems in
the
those like early 2000s, like there was this huge diversity. I mean, you'd have like New Day Rising, and then you have Poison in the Well, and then you have Morning Again. You have like
Mhm.
all these people doing, Red Roses for Blue Lady, a Birdville,
Yeah.
and just people doing all different stuff, but
Yeah.
somehow it all kind of seemed to fit in the scene. And you'd see like, you'd see like a tough guy band, and then you'd see like Birdville Omen on the same label, right, or on the same
Yeah.
lineup. Yeah,
Yeah, but that was I mean, I still think like 2000s were very different from the 90s, late 90s hardcore scene. Like it just a lot of stuff changed. So I
well,
think
it
I don't
seems
know.
like it kind of all went away and then all came back, but everybody wanted to sound like they obviously took the Poison in the Well template, but they like tried to do like a more like commercial, like As I Die or My Chemical Romance, sort of like you know I don't know. I think it's blend, but again, it makes me sound like an old man when I say that.
I just think that's when a lot more of like the whole screaming and singing thing came into everything.
Yeah,
And I
everybody
was
had to sing, the scream
yeah,
and the sing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I know most Precious Blood did that like a little bit, but really for the most part, like I wasn't super into that. I don't know, maybe it was like I don't know. I remember like Glassjaw, I think was probably one of the first bands that I saw doing that sort of thing. And I know like Deftones were sort of doing that sort of thing way back,
Or
pretty
vision
early on.
disorder.
Yeah. Yeah, but I don't know. To me they were different though. I really like them, but and they, I guess yeah, maybe it was a Long Island thing then.
It's funny, when I lived in DC, I'd never heard of them, and then I moved here, and they were one of the biggest bands around.
Oh
Like
my God, yeah, they
everybody
were
knew who they were.
huge. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, I remember. Yeah. So then probably even before Hatebreed, they sort of blew up because they got signed to Roadrunner.
yeah, and
I
and they
think they,
had Phil Anselmo on their album, like doing
yeah,
like a little guest vocal
yeah.
spot, and then they put out their more commercial, which I like, from Bliss to Devastation. I like it. I think it's a good
Yeah,
album, but
yeah.
I know that everyone hated that, and it seems like that kind of like killed the band for a while.
Yeah, a little bit. I think maybe it strayed a little too far to like Alice in Chains or something. They were definitely going for a more like commercial sound. But
Right.
I mean,
Well,
I
I
didn't
love
like the
Alice
whole
in
thing.
Chains, so
I mean, so do I. Which is why I probably was like, oh, it's not that bad. but then, definitely seemed like they were trying to go for it and get even more like mainstream, and it just doesn't always work out, and then you end up alienating everybody because then
Yeah.
your original people who liked you are like, oh, fuck that album, it sucks, blah blah blah, and then you don't get new people into you, so then it's like, oh, what do we do now?
Was there any pressure on Indecision to like change to a certain sound? Like again, it seems in those days like people were more interested in trying to put something of their own out, and they nobody thought they'd make money, so they didn't really care about that.
Yeah, not so much with Indecision. I think we got a little bit more metal towards the end, but that was just an influence of what we were listening to, I think.
What were you listening
So
to?
I
I,
think that's when,
I know a lot of people listen to At the Gates, and then all of a sudden they all
yeah,
change.
yeah. I mean, I did like At the Gates, but I don't think that was so much an influence for us. I feel like the later like Earth Crisis stuff, like Breed the Killers, like we loved like the sound on that record, and the vocals were a little odd, I think at times for Breed the Killers for Earth Crisis, but like I know we were listening to a lot of that, and that was way more metal, and I think that definitely influenced
Well,
us.
I remember
And
seeing them in code get real preachy. He would take like 10 minutes to like preach
yeah,
about like the
yeah.
sea shepherds or something.
I mean, I we it wasn't so much. It was more like a music thing. And then uh we always listened to Integrity, and I just think like we were just getting, and Pat always listened to a lot of metal. And so I think just more of the metal influence sort of creeped in, and a little bit less of like the dead guy Rorschach influence, I guess, on the last record. But you can't always keep doing the exact same thing. You have to just try and do something a little bit different because it gets boring otherwise.
Yeah, well, it's just
So,
like people go through phases. Like Dillinger came out, and everybody got way more technical. Like
hmm,
the next Running Man that came out was way more technical than anything they'd
yeah,
ever done before.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, you could say that about us too, because the later records definitely like there was a lot more shit going on. And then I think for Most Precious Blood on like the last record, I think Justin and I were listening to like a ton of Muse at the time. So there's all kinds of like weird like keyboard stuff, and like because we were listening to Muse, we're like, oh yeah, let's put something like that in. And maybe some of it works and some of it doesn't, but and also obviously we always had like a goth influence with like Sisters of Mercy and Susie and the Banshees, so that also crept in here and there for sure, that you would hear that stuff.
Well, I remember when I
So
lived in DC before I moved to New York, like everybody that was kind of alternative, whether they were
uh-huh.
punk or metal or goth or whatever, we all hung out at a goth club. And,
Uh,
because it was the one place that would basically host all of us.
yeah,
Plus,
people leave you alone.
they'd take our fake IDs and they'd believe them. So, but I remember they would always play Sister
Yeah,
Mercy, and that's the first time I heard it.
yeah. I mean, it's good. It's a good blend of, it's metallic, but it's also industrial and goth. Like it blended a lot of things in one thing. And at that time too, I was like into like Ministry and Nine Inch Nails, and so of course, like Sisters of Mercy fit right in with everything else I had been listening to at the
Yeah,
time.
they
So
play a lot of Ministry. They play a lot
yeah,
of Nails and
yeah,
Skinny Puppy and Front
yeah,
242 and all that
yeah.
sort
That
of
stuff
stuff.
was great. I loved all that stuff.
What was the club for that in New York? Because when I moved to New York, like I loved Conan High, and it got shut down right as I
Yeah.
moved here.
Okay. I mean, as far as places to play, it was always, CBGBs, as long as they were, they went through some periods when they wouldn't do hardcore shows if things got too violent or something happened, and be like,
Yeah, and
no
you
more
play with
hardcore shows.
This Is Show Shit, right? And you like everyone would say we're a metal band.
Yeah. um, and Wetlands, lots of good shows there till they closed, and Coney Island High had lots of great shows, and then they closed. ABC No Rio, um, granted, like it they were hesitant about having Indecision play, but we did play there. And trying to think where else were.
I
I mean,
remember
those were
seeing
like
Caliban at ABC No Rio. So
really.
yeah, they came all the way from Germany to play at ABC
Like
No Rio.
I mean, it's a squat type place. I'm sure they were used to that sort of thing. but I mean, those were probably like the main places for smaller shows. And there was like the Grand for like slightly bigger shows, and obviously Irving Plaza. Um, but I don't know if Irving Plaza came a little bit later. And then there was a place called the Marquee, which was in like the early 90s that I saw some really good shows at. And that closed. But then there was also like the smaller places like Bond Street Cafe and the Pyramid Club and um oh, there was another one of those types of places. Oh, the Underworld. But those were all more like pay to play places where you had to like, oh, you got to make sure like you bring in
A
25
certain number of
passes.
customers, yeah.
You got to have like, if you don't get 25 passes, you won't get your $25 for playing the show.
Well,
So,
I remember in DC, right before I moved, that's when grunge blew up big.
yeah.
So, like all the little clubs that used to have, like all the punk bands, all the metalcore bands, all the indie bands, basically,
Hmm.
suddenly got huge. And I
Yeah.
remember we had like the CBGBs in DC was called the 930 Club,
Yep. I remember that place.
and the 930 Club, they bought the local Radio City Music Hall, so all of a
Uh-huh.
sudden it was huge. And I
Uh-huh.
remember, I saw a helmet at the old 930 Club, and they like
Hmm.
blew the place apart. Basically, they sound
Yeah.
so good. And then I saw them again at the Radio City Music Hall, and they just sounded like a regular rock band. Because it didn't have
Yeah.
those small acoustics. Did
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
happen in New York?
I saw at this that club, the Marquee, like that's where I saw the grunge bands at. Like I saw Nirvana there, and it was probably like maybe like a 800 to like 1,000 capacity club, maybe at most. And I saw Helmet there and the Melvins and trying to think who else. So that was like a bigger place back in the early 90s that and I know that they had some bigger hardcore shows. I remember like Burn played there, I think maybe. And so some bigger hardcore shows would happen there. And then when the Grand was open, that was like a bigger, slightly bigger. So it was maybe like 500 or 600 people, but it still sounded good there. I'm trying to think of like I guess Irving Plaza would be a place where like um and the limelight, some when the Limelight did shows, I remember seeing like Sick of It All at the Limelight, and it was like a really big club, and I it was sort of like, I don't like this as much because it's so big.
Right.
And so yeah,
I
probably
remember seeing
Limelight
a
would
Snapcase and Agnostic Front, Irving Plaza. Like that
okay.
didn't feel like it was too big to me.
You think Irving, yeah, I mean for me, Irving Plaza is big. And
Right.
like we're playing there in June
I
with
mean, it wasn't as
Biohazard,
small as
but
CBGB's, but
no. But Irving
it
Plaza is
was
big.
huge.
It's big. I don't know. That's like 1,200 people. I don't know. um But yeah, so and I think I'm trying to think if any. I guess Roseland. I'm trying to think if there. I don't know if I ever saw any hardcore shows at Roseland. I saw Pantera at Roseland, but and like Soundgarden, and I think I saw. I think Sick of It All. You know what? Yeah, Sick of It All did play at Roseland. I think they opened for like Bad Brains or something, and it
Well, they were
it did
also
not
on
sound good.
East West, I think, for a little
Yeah.
while. Yeah,
Yes, but it did not sound very good at
yeah.
Roseland
You kind
compared
of
to
need
like
that small
yeah, yeah,
space sound. Yeah.
yes. Yeah, the only good thing about the big place is that you can find like a safe place to stand. So you don't get killed.
We I don't know if they ever held hardcore shows or metalcore shows, but did you try BB King's at all?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I know St. Andrew's Hall, like that, they had two rooms and the upstairs room was really big.
No,
And
yeah.
the downstairs room was a lot. We usually played like the small downstairs room. And I think maybe once or twice we played the gigantic upstairs room, but I don't
No.
remember who it was with.
So, what was your most successful album? Was it Indecision? Was it Most Precious Blood? Did you notice a huge difference between one and the other?
I think at the time that the actual bands were around, then definitely Most Precious Blood albums sold a lot more. But that was
Okay.
also the era of fucking sound scan bullshit where like, they kept track of all your CD sales and then they would look at that stuff and decide whether or not that would like influence whether or not you could tour with this or that band. and you had to have the manager who knew this manager to get you on this tour, and booking agents, and it was just so different an experience than with Indecision. Like Indecision, we didn't care that much about album sales. Like, sure, we wanted people to buy it, but we always preferred when they bought it from us at a show, because that meant like that was more money in our pockets and more money to like live on and stuff like that. But it wasn't, that was not
Put
so
gas
much.
in the van or something.
Exactly, but that wasn't like the deciding factor on what you did. And then I just remember like in the 2000s, like other bands would be like, "Oh, what'd you sound scan this week?" Or like bullshit like that. I'd be like, "I don't give a fuck." Like, I hate this stuff. Like that. Ugh. And the scary thing is, like, when I was in school, I start in college, like I started out as a music business major. Like, I don't know what the hell I was thinking, because I don't like the music business. It sucks in a lot of ways. So, and it's also changes so much. And so, that whole aspect of it, like, I just hated that we had to be involved in all that stuff in order to, get bigger
Isn't
tours.
it that
Or
people don't really make money off the albums anymore? They make it off touring.
I think so now. Yeah. I mean, I think unless you do like at least in like hardcore, like unless you do some like collectible type of like vinyl,
Vinyl, yeah.
or now I guess, I know that, um, Unorthodox was re-released again by this label Bitter Melody, and he made 8 tracks. I'm like, who's got an 8-track player these
I know.
days?
You gotta buy an old car
I
that has
know.
one
I'm like,
installed in it.
I mean, it's cool, but like, so I feel like unless you do create like, cassettes or vinyl, or like nobody buys CDs anymore. Everybody just, you can stream everything.
Well, I still buy CDs. I'm probably
That's
one of
cool.
like the
Okay, yeah, I
rarities.
know you probably are.
Yeah, but I remember Big Black, which is one of my favorite bands. Steve Albini put
Yeah,
out an
yep.
album. He puts everything on CD, and he called it the Rich Man's 8-track. Let's
Okay.
talk about what you're doing right now and what you're up to.
So, music wise, I'll fly. I've been trying for the last 7 years since I moved to California to get Indecision to come maybe play a show out here, but it never seems to happen. So, I'll still fly to New York, and we play every once in a while. So, like, I'm flying to New York in 2 weeks. We're playing with Gorilla Biscuits, and then in June we're playing with Biohazard at Irving Plaza, which, that'll be
Did
it'll be
Biohazard
fun.
ever break up?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Evan was out of the band for a while, and Most Precious Blood, we toured with them, and E Town Concrete and Sworn Enemy, which was probably the toughest tour we ever did. um, but Evan was still in the band on that tour, and then I think, but Bobby Hamble was not in the band anymore. And then I think it was sometime after that that Evan left, and then they were still doing stuff, and then they broke up, and then I know Billy was doing Billy Bio, that like his sort of not solo thing, but like he was fronting the band. And so, but this is like, the original lineup back together. So, I had never really been a Biohazard fan before, like Justin just sort of like wore me down, like, because I always was like, oh, they're from Brooklyn, like fuck that, like that's not real hardcore. Like, I was very narrow-minded when I was young. And so, but eventually, like, I got into them and I like them. So we were doing that, and then I do work as a pathologist assistant now, and I also co-own a company with my current partner where we make dog collars and leashes, and also sell like retail like fabric and like nylon and polypropylene webbing. It's a very odd thing, but so I basically work 2 jobs now. So there's like the pathology job, which is like my steady gig, and then there's like the side business, which is almost like a full-time thing in itself too at this
What
point.
the
So
making leashes and so on is a side business. Is
it
almost a full
started,
time thing.
yeah, it started off more as a side business, but then when Derek, he wanted to get involved and try and grow it, and I was like, all right. And so he sort of came up with like, we did start doing band dog collars. So we had like started off with Indecision, obviously was like a test one just to try it out. Then we did Madball, Sick of It All, Terror, Misfits. And then we did a few bigger bands like Judas Priest, Slayer, Motley Crue, and Motorhead. But that was also our first experience dealing with like large scale like merchandising companies, and that was a bit of a shock for us, like as to how things are done. And I think we weren't fully prepared for it. And that was also happened like those came out right as the pandemic started. So it was just like a very crazy time to be like trying to deal with these huge bands and get the word out when like the world was in such turmoil and everything. So we don't do those bands anymore, but we have some more bands coming up so that we're doing. So we're continuing that because it's a cool like novelty thing. No one else really does it, and at least having the music connections that I have has helped a little bit, at least as far as like getting a foot in the door, being like, well, this is me. Like you can see who I am, and I did this, so I'm not like some just we're not like a completely random company. We're part of like the punk and hardcore scene and
How can
everything.
people get a hold of you for the dog collar? I have a new dog. I have a new dog that I'm. Yeah, my dog
Really?
died of cancer, and I was heartbroken for a while. But
Which I always remember Loki because
yeah.
Loki, all I wanted was to pet her, and she did not like me. Always growled at me anytime I got like too
Well, I mean,
close.
she was a rescue off the street, so
I know, but I mean that's all I've ever had too. But like I just always wished. I mean, I know that she was a great dog for you, but I just want to pet you and I can't. It was always so
well, after that,
frustrating.
I had a bull terrier like
Oh,
Spuds
I remember your
McKenzie.
bull terrier.
Yeah,
Yes. Okay.
yeah.
Yes.
And unfortunately, he died from cancer. And
Oh.
so I was like, I want another bull terrier. Like, you felt so
Okay.
connected to that dog. So I
Really.
get my new dog. It's already been born. Like the lady who had the litter, she's like
Uh-huh.
getting all the shots and all that stuff. But I get on May 13th,
Oh, okay.
so I can't wait. But I'm gonna have to hit you up for a collar.
Yes. Well, so our website it's called Caninus because we basically took our dog band, which made sense. Like,
The
so if you,
grindcore band with the dog
yes,
singing. Yeah,
yes. So it made sense to
is that
use,
band still around?
we had a recording that was supposed to come out where we had Richard Christie playing drums and we have all the music, but then, Budgie and Basil, they passed away. It's like Basil died in 2010, and then Budgie passed in 2000, early 2016. Even though she made it to 16, she lived a good long life.
Right.
And then, so then I had my dog Tex at the time, and he was gonna like had some stuff from him, some vocals from him, and then he passed away 2019, I think it was. So now I have my dog Spanky, who he's a Staffordshire Bull Terrier, and they're so vocal. So like the sounds that come out of him, he's been like crying the whole time. This is Spanky.
Yeah.
So he's a Staffordshire Bull Terrier. He's only like 40 pounds, but he makes all kinds of crazy noises. So we recorded some vocals with him. But it's just I haven't finished it. Like I have to place everything, and we haven't gotten around to finishing it. But anyway, so we took the name, and because if there's a band with dogs and they're going to make their own stuff, so of course they would make their own dog collars and leashes. So we sort of based it around the original concept of the band, and so it's called Caninus Collars. It's Caninus, and so that's our website is just caninuscollars.com. And so a lot of people who buy stuff from us now have no idea that it all started as a band fronted by two pit bulls.
Can I
But
talk you into making me a dead guy or kissing goodbye collar?
uh, I wish, but we try and we do everything. Like all the band stuff is licensed, and we
No.
have to. So like we can't do one-off things. Like we have to like work out a deal with a band,
Oh,
and
okay.
then yeah. So
I
not
mean, I
because
can talk to Tim Singer. He's doing the podcast.
I mean, I don't know how many people would uh we'll see. I mean, I
That's
would
their
definitely
fault.
I would
Everyone
have
should
one.
listen to that guy.
I know. I'd be the first person to have one on my dog. but but yeah, because there's like there's a we have just like the setup for everything. Like we just need to make sure that we'll be able to sell a certain amount of them at this point. So, um, and then, we also do just like plain nylon collars and leashes. And then we have a bunch of like different, like cool fabrics that we pick out. And I mean, I like the more like, obviously the more goth and like skull stuff and everything like that, because that was the main reason why I started doing all this was like, I want like cool collars for my dogs and I can't find the stuff that I like. So that's why I sort of started doing it. And then I was making a lot of collars for dogs at the shelter I was volunteering at when I was still in Jersey City. Because I found that if you put like a nice collar on a dog that's sitting, in the
It's more
shelter,
appetizing for people to adopt it and stuff.
exactly, the dog looks less ratty or whatever. It looks
Right.
more, it seemed like it actually helped. So I was doing that a lot and then just sort of continued moving forward with it. Um, and, uh, and for pathology, I mean, it's just a continuation of, put it down. Oh, don't fall. Of, obviously, when I was working at the medical examiner's office, um, I tried to go to medical school and did was not a good time or a good fit. And so when I left and then we toured more, and then when I was done, I was just like looking for some other career where I could do pathology. And I found out about being a pathologist assistant. So I'm more like I just work in a hospital now in in like a pathology lab, and we just get all part like I used to do autopsy still on occasion, but now my current job is all just like surgical specimens. So basically, parts, kidneys, colons, um, prostates, uterus, lungs, like whatever. Any part that needs to be removed, like we get it, and we do like have to cut it in certain ways and submit certain parts so that the pathologist can properly stage the cancers or determine if something's cancer or not. And so that's my day job, is still doing that with pathology.
Have you seen have you seen the episodes of Cabinet of Curiosities? It's on Netflix. Del Toro puts out.
Yeah, I don't think I have.
It's really good, but they have a show
Okay.
called The Autopsy,
Uh-huh.
which is actually the I think the best episode of that season.
Okay, I'll look for it. Is
Yeah,
it
definitely.
do they do an actual autopsy?
They do an actual autopsy, and I don't
Okay.
want to tell you anymore, but it's well written. It's a good story. Like every episode is a full
Is
story.
it okay?
It's
So
kind of like
it's
kind of
not
like
like a
Twilight Zone.
documentary. Oh, okay. So it's not like a documentary or anything.
No, no.
Oh, okay, because I remember I watched the movie The Autopsy of Jane Doe, and
Okay.
I thought that was in that, like, I mean, and that whole thing is sort of based on. Have you seen that one?
No.
You should watch it. It was good. Um, but it's sort of all based around an autopsy and of somebody. And but it was I was sort of like there was a as far as realism in autopsies, like so many things get it really wrong, and that one was on the better side of getting it wasn't perfect, but it was better. Because when you work with all this stuff, like when you see body parts and stuff on TV or in movies, and you're just like, no, 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 like that's not real at all. So I like when things actually get it right, and people did a little research to see like what do things really look like, and I definitely have had dreams about that where like I'm in like the middle of an autopsy and then I realize like the person's not dead and I'm like, oh my God. Like
Well,
so
you definitely should see that show, The
I'll
Autopsy.
watch it. I'll watch it.
But all right. So, do people have a link they can see for when you're touring, or what your band's doing?
Um just we have an Instagram is I believe it's Indecision NYHC.
Okay.
So yeah, we don't have a website anymore or anything because we play like 2 shows a year. And so basically, if you follow that, anything that's going on with us will be on there. And also for the dog collars, we have an Instagram as Caninus Collars. So you can find us there. And and that's just
I
lots of
remember
cute dog photos.
when I saw the reading show. I don't remember who it was with. Like maybe it was with Overcast But I remember when I saw it, like everybody's still super into the band. They got like, people were moshing, they were,
Oh, it's better now than it was when we were actually really
windmilling and
around.
yeah.
Yeah. It's so like I mean it's so weird now the fact that like we can play a show and have enough money that like I don't have to pay for my flight from California. And like it's just things are so different. I think it's like that for all the bands that have are still playing now. Like that, it's just a very different time to be playing where you actually get paid fairly and um
And you
there
get the credit for being one of the forefathers of the genre.
just sure. But
Yes, sir.
but I mean, like, it's just a very different time now. Like, I never thought that there'd be a day that like we would be doing like I never thought I'd be this age and still be playing shows or anything. Like, I just it's it's just very different. Like that you can do something like that, and I think bands are much more fairly compensated and treated way better now than they ever were way back then in the olden days.
What are you like? You're like 25, 30 now,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I'm 25.
All right, Rachel. Well, thank you very much for doing this. Thank you for being on the
Yeah,
podcast.
thanks
Do
for
you have
having
anything
me.
else you want to shout out?
Always adopt a dog. Don't buy. Sorry, I know that you're getting a puppy, but you've done your share of rescuing. So, but I always like to promote adoption. And if you're in California, I know you're into horror. I just in case you don't know Linda Blair.
Of
Um,
course, I know Linda Blair.
yes, well, she has a dog rescue. That's her main focus now. She
Okay.
has an actual pit bull rescue, and she's super like vocal and advocating for shelters and rescue and pit bulls. And that's actually where my dog Spanky was adopted from her, because of course and I have another dog Lulu. She's a pit bull Chihuahua mix, also came from Linda. And so when we moved here and found out that she had a dog rescue, of course I was like, oh, we gotta go there.
I'll wrap up. Thank you very much for
Okay.
doing this, Rachel. And do you have anything else you want to say, or do you want to leave it?
Nah, thanks for doing this.
All right. Well,
Good
thank
talking
you.
with you.